afternoon. My name is Edward Perkins. I live in Pencar by northwest of Fishguard on the Strumblehead Peninsula, and I'm going to present to you a lecture this afternoon entitled A Pembrokeshire Heritage, Etifeddiaeth Sir Benfro. The reason for this presentation arose when I was asked to go to Bristol. Most of my subjects were very local, so I thought for a second and said, how can I get some flavour of Pembrokeshire into a talk for general interest? And we have, of course, three names on the screen there: David or Dewi Sant, Cambrensis, Geralds Cambrensis, and Henry Tudor. All of them involved in Welsh, English, international European history throughout their stories. So I hope that this will give you a little idea of some of the heritage of Pembrokeshire. Here's one to open, which is St David's Cathedral. Many of you already know that. A number of acknowledgements you'll see there on the list. I'm not going to go through them, but they all have provided assistance, together with assistance from published documents, etc., as you can see there. What we have in the cathedral today is a modern statue of St. David, but it does have some very interesting points. He's standing on a raised platform. There's a dove on his shoulder and a bishop's staff in his hand. Of course, whether he was made a bishop in St. David's back in the 6th century is open to argument. What is also uncertain, although it is a strong tradition, that he went to Llandewi Brefi, he delivered an oration there, and he had a platform raised miraculously that he could see everybody, and a dove landed on his shoulder. We'll talk a little bit more about Llandewi Brefi in a minute, but this gives you a little of the background which goes with David. The next statue is one of Geralds Cambrensis, born 1147, died in 1223. And you'll see the entitlement there, the bishop who never was. And if you look very carefully at the statue, behind his feet on the right-hand side is a bishop's mitre, which he never wore. He was, of course, the grandson of Gerald of Windsor, the grandson of Nest, Gerald's wife, and the daughter of Rhys ap Tudor. Or rather, Nest was the daughter of Rhys ap Tudor. The third picture is taken in Pembroke of Henry Tudor, the statue of Henry Tudor, with the castle in the background, born in 1457 in that very castle and died in 1509. Brought to English history and European history, the Tudor dynasty, which lasted until Queen Elizabeth died in 1601. His father was Edmund Tudor, his mother Margaret Beaufort, and she was the great-granddaughter of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. So a little bit about Pembrokeshire before we start. Before 1536, Pembrokeshire did not exist. It was created by Henry VIII in his reorganisation of Wales. And you can see underneath there the various areas of Pembrokeshire that existed prior to the Norman conquest. And in particular, Pembrokeshire, St. David's area up to Fishguard, Ross, which is the southwest area, Cemmaes, Penbro, Emlyn, Gwarthab. Now, Gwarthab is today mostly Carmarthenshire, and that was Henry VIII's doing. But after the Norman conquest, things changed, and you had Dewi's Land instead of Pembrokeshire, Ross, Castlemartin, Daegleddau in the middle of the county, Cemmaes, Narberth, and Cilgerran. Here's a map showing the various areas, and you can see how Pembrokeshire looks considerably larger on that map than it is today. This is another map showing a little bit more of interest to Pembrokeshire. 67 Treaty of Montgomery, and you can see Pembrokeshire with the Bishop, Cemmaes Fitzmartin, Isabella de Breos was in the Rose, and Pembroke down the bottom, and you've got Narberth as well, which isn't actually clearly marked. If we go back to the names, Pembrokeshire was the old name, but Dewi's Land was first recorded in 1207. And of course, it's an area based on the name David or Dewi, the patron saint of Wales. He lived, born and died in the 6th century. He's undoubtedly Wales's leading, shall we call it, Celtic saint, or saint from the early generations of the 6th and 7th centuries. And he's celebrated today, not only with St. David's Day on the 1st of March, but also with St. David's Cathedral. So what do we know about David? Well, we know a little, and we've got a lot of legend. Here's St. David's Cathedral in 2012, but it wasn't always as shown here. What are the facts? He established a religious settlement. It was in an area in Welsh called Glyn Rosyn, the edge, the rushy edge of the river, of the stream. Of course, the intellectual Normans and others saw the word Rosyn and said, oh, roses. It's got absolutely nothing to do with roses. That's an intellectual mistake by the Normans. Vallis Rosina was the name given to the area, but it has no historical standing whatsoever. There are no remaining buildings. We have the story of Llandewi Brevi Church, and here in 1690, Edward Llwyd found 2 stones, well, it should have been 1 stone, but it was broken, and he deciphered the engraving on it. The engraving said, Hic jacet iurnet, filius Jacobi, qui ocosis fuit, propter predam sancti David. Here lies Iurnet, the son of Jacob, who lost his life protecting David's property. What's important about that is it's the only written detail we have of David, carved onto a stone. We don't know when, but sometime in the 7th century. And we also have a reference there to Sancti David, Saint David. So that gives you a reputation in the 6th and 7th century that we are familiar with today. We have a lot of legends. Many of them have come from the works of Rhyd Gyfarch and Geraldus Cambrensis. Rhyd Gyfarch was the son of Bishop Sulian and himself a bishop of St. David's. Geraldus Cambrensis, of course, was the grandson of Nest and Gerald of Windsor. Part of these legends talk about a waterman, that he spent a lot of time contemplating and standing in water, and that comes from a Latin text from Brittany, dated about 1880. We have the legends of Boyer, the Irish chieftain, and his wife, who tried to get rid of David and tempt David by dancing with her maidens in front of him. We have stories of journeys to Rome and Jerusalem. We have a reference to his father, Sant, a son of Caredig, descended from Cynedda. Yes, correct. Caredig was descended from Cynedda, but whether there is a son relationship there, we don't know. His mother was reputedly non, and he was born in a thunderstorm. Just a little view of Clegir Boyer, a large rock west of St. David's on which Boyer had his camp. But it was, of course, an old Iron Age fort in the first place. So a word about the Celtic Saints, or the saints of the early 5th, 6th, 7th century. Many of their names are well known to us. David, Illtyd, Cadog, Gildas, and they had disciples of the Irish religious houses. And of course, from Ireland, the Christian message spread across the British Isles, particularly up the Western Seas to Scotland. St. Patrick is also mentioned in these details and connected, we understand, with St. David's, but Patrick died 461, long before David was born. The only Patrick story that I would believe is that he may well have come to St. David's and sailed from there to Ireland when he was instructed to go to Ireland and convert the Irish sometime in the 430s. But we do have early English monasteries: Manobier, St. David's, Llanilltyd, Llancarvan, Llandarf, Llanelwy, Bangor, Bangor-on-Dee, Llandailo, and Llanbaden. All of those names are connected with the early saints of Wales. We also know that a man called Finian was an Irish disciple of the Welsh teachers. He came to St. David's and he went back to Ireland and founded a monastery in Ireland, and from that monastery, many other monasteries were founded in Ireland. This is a map showing some of the routes and details from which the Irish Church went on its travels. And you can see right up to Scotland, into the north of England, and down into Brittany and Cornwall as well. But the map does not show any of David's followers, and they spread through Wales, we know that, Cornwall, Brittany, and an example is St. Petroc. There are dedications in Llanbedrog, in Orllyn, Verwig, St. Petroc's in Stackpool in Pembrokeshire, 2 in Somerset, 17 in Devon, 6 in Cornwall, and 8 in Brittany, just to give you a flavour of how these people moved around. Again, the spread of the Irish-trained Christian teachers spread into Europe in the 6th and 7th centuries. You see there a long list of what are large cities today: Würzburg, Salzburg, Constance, Bordeaux, Tours, Angers, Nantes, Lixoul, Taranta, Babbio, both in Italy, and St. Gallen in Switzerland. This work was done by a man called Columban, not Columba, Columban, born around 540 AD, and also with his companion Gaul. And that gives you St. Gallen in Switzerland today. Thus, 300 years after the Roman withdrawal, we have this influence of the Christian message spreading throughout the areas of Wales, areas of the British Isles, and right across Europe. Here's a map showing some of those spreading details, as you can see, around Ireland, into Europe, down into Italy, and into the west of France, and down towards the Spanish border. In other words, an amazing amount of evangelical activity based on Ireland, and Ireland connected to St. David's. So what do we have today? Wales' best known cathedral, and it's built of local Carbudi stone. It has a number of remarkable features: the stone carving and decorative Gothic stonemason's work, the nave roof, which is Irish and local oak, choir stalls and the sovereign's stall, Trinity Chapel and its roof vaulting, the vaulted Gothic arch, and St. David's shrine. Here's Carbudi Bay with the sandstone cliffs, and on the shore, the coloured pebbles. Here's the sovereign's seat in St. David's Cathedral. The sovereign has been there, Elizabeth, 4 times. Prior to her visit, the last king of England who came to St. David's was Edmund I in 1284. Just a little bit of the decoration. This is the ornate stone decoration on the left-hand side on Bishop Gower's tomb, and on the right-hand side, what I call the imperfect arch. The right-hand side of it is okay as a Gothic arch, but if you look at the left side, you will see quite clearly that it's got a bend. We think that that result of that bent arch is connected with the whole west front of the cathedral, which during the course of building had to be moved and replanned. And as a result, the arch had to be changed as well. So when you go to the cathedral next, do have a look out for it. Here's the cathedral in 1745, a print from the Buck series. Here you can see on the left-hand side a very different Bishop's Palace than it is today. But on the right-hand side, look very carefully at these roofs. They did not exist. And those areas were without a roof, both sides of the cathedral, for some 200 years as a result of the removal of the lead for Cromwell's troops during the Civil War. This is a painting made by Pugin, who was the artist for John Nash. John Nash was commissioned to try and stabilize this front west wall of the cathedral, which he did. And he put in a beautiful new window, most of which he took from the St. Mary's College Chapel alongside the cathedral. He put these big buttresses here, and they did the job. They stabilized the front wall, which had been moving at about a centimetre or maybe a little bit more per annum. And it wouldn't have taken long for the front wall to have fallen down and disaster to have hit the cathedral. Here's another Pugin's paintings. Here he is in the front, painting away. You can see him there painting away. A fish pond. This is the canonry here, which is no longer there today, built by John Nash for the canons. There's the front wall with the supports and a beautiful picture of the Bishop's Palace. Here is Edmund Tudor's tomb. We'll talk about that later. And in the back, we have the redecorated and the shrine of St. David, which was redecorated and again brought into proper circulation during this last 12 years. Here it is, the restored shrine of St. David, with 3 painted panels on lime wood, St. David, St. Patrick and St. Andrew. It was the Normans who put St. Andrew into St. David's, but Patrick, of course, we referred to, and David. And the artist is a local artist, Sarah Crisp. Right, we leave St. David there and St. David's, but we'll go on to Geraldus Cambrensis. We've seen his statue in the cathedral, the bishop who never was. Why? Well, we'll try and tell you all about that. His grandmother was Nest, the daughter of Rhys ap Tudor, reputedly the fairest maid in all of Wales. And as you see on the detail there, she had an eventful and productive life, somewhere in the region of maybe 10 to 12 children. The ones we know about are listed below. A son from Henry I, 5 children from Gerald, possibly 2 from Owain Cadogan, but that's conjecture. William Haight is certain, 1, and Stephen de Morisco, her last husband, produced a son as well. Don't forget, this is in the 1110 to 1130, 1120 that she was producing children. No National Health Service, no nothing. She must have been a very strong constitution. And she's also the grandmother of many, many Norman followers who went on the 1168, 1170 invasions of Ireland and settled out there, the Norman invaders of Ireland. Gerald of Windsor was the custodian of Pembroke Castle. That's his grandfather. And of course, it's one of the finest medieval castles in the country. The builders, Richard and Gilbert de Clare, William Marshall, and Richard de Valence. Nest was given a wife by Henry I, 5 children, as I say, and Nest must have had a dowry. There's nothing written, but the name Carew can be very easily translated into Gair Rhyw. In other words, the fort on the ridge. The fort on the ridge would have been a Welsh fort. Undoubtedly, at the last end of the 11th century, it would have belonged to Rhys ap Tudor. And it's therefore quite reasonable to presume that with the marriage of Nest came the property of Carew to Gerald of Windsor. He was also given part of Emlyn, and on that he started to build a castle. Here's Pembroke Castle by J.W. Turner, somewhere about 1800. You can see the keep, you can see the towers, the growth on the walls, and also the gate here into the cavern, and ships and boats on the water. Here it is today, the Barbican, in very well restored condition, but it does show one thing of medieval architecture, particularly Norman architecture. Here's the entrance, but to get into the Barbican, you have to turn right, and there's a courtyard in there, and of course every position up here could shower missiles, anything, and anybody who got into the courtyard. Here's the tower built by William Marshall. It's over 80 feet high. It's got a circumference at the bottom of some 18 foot, and foundation walls are extremely thick. Sorry, the walls are 18 foot thick. The diameter at the bottom is considerably more. Built from 1210 to 1215, and all from local stone. I like this picture of Pembroke Castle taken showing the north side. You and I are small Welsh soldiers. we're trying to get up there. There's this great big cliff, and on the top, there's every sort of armament of the time to try and stop us. And I don't think we, sitting down below here, would have had much chance. However, in the story of Nest, we also have this man, Owain Cadogan of Powys. He was a distant cousin of Nest, but in around about 1109, 1110, Christmas 1109, there was a feast in Cardigan Castle that his father called. And he came there and he heard that Nest wasn't far away. In fact, the story is he heard that she was in Cilgerran Castle with Gerald of Windsor. The result was that he captured Nest and he escaped with her, first of all to North Wales, some say to Ireland, some say more children arrived. But what is certain, that by 1115, he was back in Henry I's forces fighting in Normandy for Henry. It's a very, very confused story, and it's impossible to put the whole thing here on the screen. Nest went back to Pembroke fairly quickly. Gerald died in 1116, and Owain, before that, came with some forces to Carmarthen, looking for some of the forces that were opposing Henry I. And he bumped these forces opposing Henry I were on the, as it were, fleeing from Owain's forces and bumped into some of Gerald's troops. And they told them a story and they set off in chase of Owain, and he was killed in the ensuing melee. So Gerald had his own back up to a point, but it's all a story of great confusion, and whether the dates are correct is another matter. However, Nest went on to have a son from William Haight, who was then in charge of Pembroke Castle after Gerald died. And by 1120, she was married to Stephen de Morisco, the founder of Cardigan Castle. A little bit about Cilgerran. This, of course, is 13th century building, nothing like what Gerald might have had there. We don't know what he had there, but these are the two remaining towers of Cilgerran. And here's Cardigan as it is today, in wonderful restored condition. Of course, the Cardigan Castle was a Norman fort under Stephen, but it was captured by Rhys ap Griffith in 1157. And he went on to build the stone castle. So it was the first stone Welsh castle. And no trace of Stephen's castle remains, but there was a further original site down on the estuary at Old Castle Farm, but that was probably from the Montgomerys in 1093. One feature of Cardigan Castle today is, of course, a listed building, and it has a 20th century memorial as well, a pillbox overlooking the bridge. So not only is the castle listed, but also the pillbox. Here's Carew, a glorious castle in many ways, Norman built and extended by Sir Rhys ap Thomas, and also extended here on the right-hand side. Here you can see the Elizabethan extension as well. Here's the Nathaniel Buck picture of Carew, and you can see the hole in the wall driven by the cannons from the Oliver Cromwell's forces when they besieged the castle. Now then, Geraldus Cambrensis, a little bit more of him. Nest and Gerald's daughter Angharad marries William de Barry, the son of Odo de Barry, and their son was called Gerald. Educated in France, 1188, his famous journey with Bishop Baldwin through Wales. Next time you drive up to Cardigan and you go through past the Salutation Hotel on the way to Cardigan, you will go over a little bridge just beyond the Salutation where the road turns to the right. And if you look at the Ordnance Survey map, the detail is shown as Pont Baldwin. Has that name come all the way down from the 12th century? Quite possible. We know that Gerald worked on the cathedral with Bishop Peter de Leer, We know that he was twice chosen by the canons to be Bishop of St. David's and twice refused by royal command. Because of that, he journeyed 3 times to Rome to obtain from Pope Innocent III assistance to his appointment. But by 1203, he admitted failure of his efforts. And it was the great opposition from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Hubert Walter, that caused that problem. He was a prolific writer. He wrote about Ireland. He wrote A Journey Through Wales. He wrote The Life of St. David, and he died in Lincoln in 1223. He's buried in St. David's Cathedral. He's also quoted as the greatest writer in Latin that Wales has ever produced. Here's his journey through Wales and a couple of quotes. Newgale, the sandy shores of South Wales being laid bare by the extraordinary violence of a storm, and discovered the trunks of trees cut off by the floods that would have come in after the melting of the glaciers. The spot where the Church of St. David stands is called the Vale of Roses. We've talked about that already. The River Alyn, a muddy and unproductive rivulet. As the southern part of Wales, particularly Pembrokeshire, is much pleasanter on account of its plains and sea coast. Almost all the people live on the produce of their herds, with oats, milk, cheese and butter. They pay no attention to commerce, shipping or manufactures. Here is Manobier Castle, a few shots of that. It's taken from the car park and you'll see the major walls of the castle. Here's Turner's picture of it with some sort of market going on in front. And he's got the sea much too close, but never mind about that. That's what we call artistic license. Here we are inside the castle. This is the great hall and the chapel as well here. And then up on the right, we have what is termed Gerald's room. Flight of stairs goes up and there's a little room in there, which we understand, or given to understand, was occupied by Gerald. Here we are looking at the castle from the churchyard. A very odd place to build a castle today. When you look back, it controlled the area around, but no real harbour, no river, no obvious benefit to a commercial purpose to have a castle there. Here's a map of his journey through Wales, coming in from Hereford, following around through Glamorgan, down to St. David's, up to Cardigan, Cardigan up to Strata, Florida, Aberystwyth, up the north coast, Bangor, and back down through mid-Wales and back to Hereford. And he preached, together with Bishop Baldwin, support for the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade took place about 4 years afterwards and led, of course, by one of the English kings, Richard I. But this was 1188. Bishop Baldwin was preaching in Latin. How the local population understood it is a bit of a mystery. Undoubtedly, Gerald would have been able to translate, but equally, whether that happened or not, we don't know. Here is a picture miles and miles away from Pembrokeshire, but it's the stone bridge of Steiner Brücke in Regensburg over the Danube. And it's over this bridge that Richard marched his forces heading that way into what would have been Bohemia and to get down towards a place to get down to sail to the Palestine with his troops. So here we are. Gerald also was involved with 3 kings of England, Henry II, Richard I, and King John. And from 1183 to 1204, he was a well-known figure at the royal court. So let's go to the last of these 3 people, Henry Tudor. A large gap comes from the time from Gerald to the Tudor dynasty, but the story starts a good bit before Henry's birth in 1457. There on the left-hand side, you'll see the story, in a way, starts in St. David's, because there's the tomb of his father, Edmund Tudor. Edmund Tudor was the brother of a king and father of a king. How? Well, let's just look at the pedigree and see where we get to. Here's the descent of Henry Tudor. We start with Edward III and his third son, John, became John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. Conveniently, he married 3 times. First of all to Blanche of Lancaster, and that gave us the royal descent into Henry IV, called Henry Bolingbroke, who was born in Bolingbroke Castle in Yorkshire. His son, Henry V, born in Monmouth, and Henry V, of course, married Catherine de Valois. Forget about the right-hand side for the moment, but on the left-hand side, we have from the marriage of Henry V and Catherine, Henry VI, and he married Margaret of Anjou, and their son was Edward of Westminster, killed in the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. On the right-hand side, we have John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and his third marriage to Catherine Swynford. And the family went to live in France. And this is where the name Beaufort comes from, because they lived in the village of Beaufort. So we had 2 John Beauforts, and the second John Beaufort produced a daughter, Margaret. We know, or we believe, that Catherine married a second time. There's a great deal of fuss and bother that Catherine de Valois, Queen under Henry V, should be kept under control by the English barons. But it didn't happen. She met this courtier, Owain Tudor, from Penmynydd in Anglesey, and by about 1430, they were reputedly married, and certainly 5 children came. 2 sons we know about, 1 son we don't, and we believe 2 daughters as well. Edmund and Jasper were the 2 sons, and Edmund married Margaret Beaufort in 1456. Here we have the result of that marriage, which was Henry, who became Henry VII, born in 1457, died in 1509. A little bit more of the descent of Owain Tudor. We go back all the way to Rhys ap Griffith and Lord Rhys of Dinnerah, Rhys ap Griffith, or Lord Rhys, whichever you want to call him, his daughter Gwenllian, born Lem 78, and married Edmund Vychan of Llansadwrn. Now that Llansadwrn is not in Carmarthenshire, it's in Gwynedd. And he was the seneschal or chamberlain of Gwynedd, and he served Llewellyn Fawr from sometime like 1216 through to 1246, although Llewellyn had died by then, and he was in place as the seneschal of Gwynedd. From him come a number of generations: Goronwy, Tudor, Tudor Hain, another Goronwy, Tudor ap Goronwy, Meredydd ap Tudor, and we come down to Owain ap Meredydd, born in 1400, died in 1461. Just to complete the marriages of John of Gaunt, there's his first marriage we've talked about, there's his third one we've talked about, and in the middle, he was married to Constance of Castile. Her daughter Catherine married Henry III, King of Castile in Spain, and that gives you a descent into the Bourbon and Habsburg royal families. So Owain Tudor, life, a descendant of the Tudor family of Penmynydd, part of Henry V forces in France. He attended the Battle of Agincourt, he attended the royal court, and he developed a relationship with Catherine de Valois. There were statutes against Catherine's marriage, and by 1430, she had apparently married in secret. The children we refer to, both Edmund and Jasper in particular. Catherine died in 1436. By November 1452, Edmund was Earl of Richmond and Jasper Earl of Pembroke. On the 1st of November 1456, Edmund died in Carmarthen after a skirmish and was buried in the Friary. Jasper took over looking after the infant Henry, who was born the following January in Pembroke Castle in 1457. We're in, of course, the Wars of the Roses, which were very dangerous for any of the Lancastrians, because by 1471, the House of Lancaster was defeated, Henry VI was murdered, Edward, Prince of Wales, was killed at the Battle of Tewkesbury. So Henry Tudor's father, as I say, died in 1456, buried in Carmarthen. And his grandfather, Owain, came out to fight for the Lancastrians, and he was captured at Mortimer's Cross in February 1461. He was taken to the Hereford marketplace, and there he was executed. But he did manage to say some words, and they are reputedly, "Know ye, this head has lain in the lap of a queen." Jasper and Henry escaped to France. Jasper returned to Pembrokeshire and England at various times, but Henry didn't return to Pembrokeshire till 1485, when he landed at Dale and marched to Bosworth Field. That, of course, is the story we celebrate in Pembrokeshire, where he married, he landed in Dale with his forces and was able to march through Pembrokeshire up to meet other forces before the Battle of Bosworth. Here's his tomb, Edmund Tudor's tomb in St David's Cathedral, and moved there after the friary in Carmarthen was dissolved. Just a quick picture of Pembroke Castle as it is today. And here's the view inside the room in the castle, the Henry VII Tower, where he was born. Margaret, his mother, was 14 years of age. The mind boggles today. And his birthplace, as I say, January 1457. Here's a picture from the outside. Here's the tower here, and you're going down there to the Barbican. This is the tower on the corner, and there, of course, is the great keep in the background. So Margaret Beaufort was the mother to Henry VII, the great-granddaughter of John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford, granddaughter of John Beaufort, daughter of John Beaufort and Margaret Beauchamp, born in 1443, and she was the founder of Christ College in Cambridge. She was undoubtedly one of the famous historical characters of the start of the Tudor period. Just a little picture of Tenby, showing Tenby Harbour, from which Henry escaped in 1471, held apparently somewhere down here in a tunnel, waiting for a ship to come to take him to Brittany. So what has the county given us? It's given us a patron saint, Dewi Sant. It's given us the fairest maid in all of Wales, Nest. It's given us the son of a 14-year-old royal mother, and thus the Tudor dynasty. As I say at the bottom, the rest is history. Just a little bit to finish off on St David's. St David, described by Bishop Basil Jones in his book in 1856, the first light kindled by its original patriarch may often have shone but feebly in the darkness, but it still remains one and unextinguished. And the poem by James Nicholas, An isel ynglyn y rosyn mae'r eglwys, a'i miraglau cyfrin, Crist tyna mewn gerwyn, hael a gwydir o'r lliw'r gwyn, yno ar ffin ar y bonig, mae hedd, a mae'n casegredig, ni ddaw un yw'r nos unig, ond y brain I glwyd y brig. To translate the last two lines, nobody comes in the night at night alone, only the crows to the branches of the trees. So I hope that's given you an idea of a Pembrokeshire heritage, and that you've been able to enjoy some of our details of our fascinating history of Pembrokeshire.